And just by coincidence, the next item on the agenda is the Budget and Audit Committee items. I'm going to turn this over to our current acting treasurer, Bryn Peterson, and the director of advancement, Kevin Platchey, for the first read of the proposed fiscal policy revisions and the first read of the fiscal year 2023 draft Bar Association budget.
Yeah, no, thank you, President Tolleson. As I said yesterday, this is a first read. What you're going to see today has been put together by Director Platchey and others. Has taken a lot of work on their part. The budget and audit, we've seen it. We haven't really acted upon it. So the idea for today's meeting is for the full Board of Governors to see what it looks like initially. And most importantly, to get feedback, because I know that not everybody on the BOG is part of the B&A committee. So the important thing here is to get feedback from everybody else so that us on the Budget and Audit Committee can take that input and use that throughout the rest of the process to refine and kind of do whatever needs to be done or should be done before we bring it back for the final read in September. Having said that, I will turn it over to Director Platchey.
And before I get started, I'm going to turn it over to our executive director because we have our director of finance here, and I think Tara would like to introduce her to all of you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I just want to take a quick moment since we have a little time to introduce you all to Tiffany Lynch. Tiffany, you want to unmute and just wave, say hi so you'll pop up.
Good morning, everyone.
So Tiffany, some of you may remember Tiffany if you've been around for a while. Tiffany is returning to us. Tiffany formerly worked in our finance department in a number of roles, including as the associate director. And we are so pleased to have her rejoining as our director of finance. Tiffany is a licensed CPA, has served as a financial leader at other organizations and knows the Bar Association inside and out. So we are very lucky to have her rejoining us. And I'll just give her an opportunity to say anything she'd like to say before we move on to the business of the day.
Sure. Thank you, Tara. I'm really pleased to be back with all of you today. I am really excited about getting going in my role as Director of Finance. I'm excited to work with all of you. And I just want to say thank you to Kevin and Tara and everyone else for kind of continuing to move the ball forward as I come on board.
All right. Thank you, Tiffany. And I am very happy to have you here. All right. So we're going to get going. I think what we'll do is review the FY23 budget first. The next item after the budget is a review of the fiscal policy revisions. And Governor Adewale worked extensively on these with myself and the finance team. So I will be asking him probably to also help present when we get to the fiscal policy revisions. Rex, am I a co-host? I am going to share my screen. All right. So as Treasurer Peterson indicated, this is a first review of the FY23 budget. The Budget and Audit Committee did review the budget, but the version of the budget they reviewed has changed. And I do want to point out that this version of the budget has also changed, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But Shelley sent out late materials this morning, and that is the version that contains the version of the budget that we're going to review. And the reason for the change, and I'll go over just sort of high level, is in doing some manual reconciliations of the budget, our controller, Maggie, you and I found a formula error in Adaptive Insights, which is the the computer program we use, the software we use for budgeting, there was a modeling error, and we brought it to the attention of Adaptive Insights. Last night, we did some manual reconciliation and discovered that the problem is in allocating out our indirect costs. So we had $1,074,000 of indirect cost that we sweep from the tech budget, from the tech cost center into indirects, because that whole cost center is allocated into indirect cost. The problem was that it allocated out the $1,074,000, but the other part of that is you have to credit back the direct cost. And Adaptive Insights was only pulling a little over $800,000 back to the credit to direct cost. So we were under crediting the direct costs that we swept from that tech cost center into the indirect cost. So the good news is we were under crediting costs, so it's favorable to us. So what you're going to see is that the budgets that is presented this morning is a little over $200,000 favorable to the bottom line. So that is the change. If you would like more information about that, I'm happy to talk to anyone about more details of what it is. So we'll get started. And what we're going to look at first is just an overview and general assumptions contained within the FY23 budget. And the FY23 budget will represent a hybrid of in-person and remote work activities and events, but with more emphasis on in-person meetings and events as compared to the past 2 years. And as some prior discussions yesterday would indicate, many entities are really motivated to start getting back to in-person kind of things. So that's what this budget reflects, is a continuing increase in in-person meeting and events. The FY23 budget is being compared to the FY22 reforecast. That represents the most comparable assumptions, meaning hybrid, remote, in-person, over the past few years. It's also the last budget that the board adopted, so that's what we're comparing to. The Client Protection Fund member assessment is $20 for 2023. License fees, I don't have it in here, but it's worth mentioning that license fees are remaining static, because that was determined last year for this year. CLE revenues are projected to be lower as compared to FY22 because there's no longer the double reporting group, which occurred because of COVID, because the Supreme Court delayed reporting for I believe it was the 2020 reporting group. And that's the same analysis is true of the MCLE revenue on the regulatory side. That's lower this year because there was a double reporting group that also impacted positively their revenues last year. Headcount is comparable to the FY22 reforecast. Headcount in the FY23 budget is 139.25. In the reforecast, headcount was the 139.65 full-time equivalents. The reason for the small decrease is one of our positions, one staff position, went from full-time to part-time. We are also budgeting for a full staff, for full staffing. And what we do know is that we will have open positions, but for purposes of the budget, we're budgeting for full staffing. And we also anticipate requesting budget for 1 to 4 additional positions, which I'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the salary slide. So the next slide is looking at revenue assumptions. And the breakdown here is the estimation of the number of members for each of these categories, and then the revenue associated with each of the lines. So we've got active, foreign law consultant, all the way down to new admittee. with a total of 42,264 members represented throughout the categories. And then our total revenue is estimated at 17,159,281, and that's license fee revenue. Other things to note is the Keller deduction. Approximately 13% of our members are expected to take the deduction. That's based on historical data going back about a decade. Late fees, 2% of members are expected to pay late based on historical data, which equates to $280,000. The CPF assessment at $20 per member is estimated to be $730,000. So those are the general revenue assumptions. And then CLE fund revenue assumptions. For seminars, FY22 revenues are projected to be on par with pre-pandemic levels, which would be equivalent to our FY19 fiscal year. Products on-demand seminar sales are budgeted to be on par with pre-pandemic levels. And again, as I noted earlier, they are predicted to be lower than last year because we don't have the double reporting group. And then we will be planning a summer and a winter sale for on-demand products. Typically in the past, we've only ran a summer sale. We are going to add in a winter sale in FY23, and that's to expand member benefits to our members, because these summer sales are usually, the summer sale and the winter sale will include all of our on-demand products, which I think there's over 500, and they're 50% off. So it's just adding another opportunity for members to take benefit of a reduced cost. And the other upside of that is it generates interest in the store during times in the fiscal year when demand is a little bit lower. Yes, we'll plug the summer sale. It's go on now. All right, so expense assumptions. Salaries, the salary line assumes a 2.3% increase, which provides for movement of staff through their designated salary steps in the grid that was implemented in our reforecast. And it also includes an allowance for open positions. And the reason for that is we have a full staffing model in the budget. We have open positions, but we're assuming all of them are filled. Medical benefits, retirement, and payroll taxes are not yet available and are expected to increase, and that could range from 2 to 5%. We don't expect that we'll have much fluctuation with that because we've already built in an estimated increase in the numbers you're going to see today. There's a rent increase, and the net of that is $101,946. Legal expense. Our legal expenses are estimated at $250,000, and that's as per prior year's budgets. This year, we're not anticipating spending that full amount, but that's the amount we budget each year. If we don't use it all, then obviously it rolls back to the general fund. We do have a Higher Logic volunteer management platform that we are looking to implement in FY23. The cost of that is $43,500, and that's placed into a capital account. So these technology investments and hardware are generally depreciated and as part of a capital account. And in this case, the full $43,500 is not going to be expensed in FY23. We're depreciating it, so the cost is going to be about $65.25 per year until it's depreciated out. So the expense to the budget for FY23 would be $65.25, or right around there. And then we're anticipating an office space downsizing project. As you all know, we're looking to sublease a couple of the floors in our downtown office. And because of that, we have to make that space available. So we're trying to downsize. We're looking to downsize to 2 floors in our Seattle office. And we've gotten some quotes for cost of consolidating. And there's things that have to be taken into consideration when we consolidate that are pursuant to obviously just general spacing issues, but also some court rules require, for instance, MCLE to be separate from CLE. So we've got to keep them separate and make accommodations for those kinds of things. Again, this is a capital project. So the full cost of the estimate would not be hitting the expense line for FY23. We would anticipate depreciating this expense over 3 years. So it would be a little over 30,000 that would actually be expensed in FY23. And salaries is our next slide. So in the FY22 reforecast, the full slate of salaries plus the cost to implement the salary grid that we went over with you before when we presented the reforecast was $12,388,996. In the FY23 budget, salaries are estimated at $12,675,409. This change represents a 2.3% increase, and that represents movement of staff through the new grid pursuant to this step method. And so that would be staff moving to their next step based on their anniversary date. And then we are considering requests for up to 4 additional staff in OGC, IT, communications, and ODC. And the reason for this is that at least 3 of these positions that we're anticipating wouldn't be positions that only focus on the department in which they're hired. They would be focusing to help initiatives interdepartmentally and across the organization to help provide some slack as we get new initiatives into the organization and deal with expanding our services while maintaining our current services. And our executive director has prepared some slides that she would like to go over with you. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and then we'll get back to the budget presentation.
And Kevin, do you have them incorporated there so you'll keep going
Yeah.
through? Okay. So this is a presentation that I prepared for budget and audit. I wasn't necessarily intending to present it here, but the feedback from the committee is that it'd be useful. So we are contemplating requesting sufficient salary budget to add some additional positions. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the why, acknowledging that salaries make up the largest percentage of our budget. Salaries have been a point of debate over the last few years, and it's a big deal. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why we are contemplating bringing forward this request. And essentially, it's trying to build capacity. And there's 4 areas that I think about when I'm thinking about building capacity. The first is dealing with the expected unexpected. I think we all know that significant things happen that require us to quickly adapt and refocus our efforts. Recently, we had a significant cyber incident, which brought down our website for a large period of time. We had to refocus a lot of our staff, not only IT staff, but staff in our general counsel's office. Pretty much we had to drop everything and focus all of our efforts on this issue, and also communications folks. And that stuff, I think, is not unexpected. So therefore, it's the expected unexpected, not to mention the public health crisis that we've all been dealing with. There's also local and national tragedies that often cause us to pause and think about how do we want to respond to these things. And then I also mentioned disruptions to the organization and profession. And part of what I'm talking about there is that there are things like the bar licensure task force, for example. We heard yesterday in the update that likely there's going to be a recommendation for new pathways to licensure. And that's going to be work that we didn't necessarily plan for, but that we will need the capacity to respond to. Sometimes when unexpected things happen, you have the opportunity to scale up and scale back down, but not always. And often you need to have the capacity on hand to be able to deal with things. The other reason for the capacity is to have the capacity to explore new ideas. There are a lot of big ideas on the horizon. I already mentioned alternative pathways to licensure. We have the regulatory laboratory that's being proposed. One of the things that we've talked about a little bit over the years that several of us on staff are interested in is proactive management-based regulation, which would essentially be shifting the framing and some of our activities that we sometimes think about as professional association activities. So these are different services to the membership, but thinking about them in terms of regulation, that this is a proactive way that we can regulate the profession by giving members of the profession the tools that they need to practice effectively and ethically. All of these new ideas are on top of the day-to-day work, and we need the capacity to be able to explore them effectively without taking away from our day-to-day responsibilities. Adding without taking away is the other category. You know, one thing that we've talked a lot over the years about the effectiveness of our programs, the need that we're sort of overdue to do a program review. I think one thing that I've observed in the organization, and it's probably true of most organizations, it's very difficult to take something away because everything we do is really important to somebody. And so I think that often it's easy to add things, but a lot harder to take things away. And so just over the last few years, you know, we've been adding more trainings, more meetings, more retreats. We've added the Small Town and Rural Committee. We've added the Strategic Planning Council. And just to be clear, these are great things. These are things that we should be doing, but we need the staff to do them. And we haven't always been able to find things that we can wind down, which really brings me to my last point, which is striving for excellence. A few years ago, we did the climate and culture survey, and one of the recommendations to the executive leadership team was for us to articulate to the staff, what is the culture that we're trying to create? And we came up with 4 pillars, which were excellence, unity, integrity, and joy. And the one that I wanted to bring in here is excellence. We really want to be, and I think all of you want us to be, providing excellent service to the members, excellent service to the public, excellent service to the volunteers. And we need to make sure that we have the capacity to do that. Next slide. I'll go through the rest of these fairly quickly. These are essentially the same 4 points with just a few more details. So dealing with the expected and unexpected, you know, that includes not only things like the cybersecurity threats, but also task forces and work groups that they're not permanent, they're not here to stay, but they pop up and we need to provide support. So taxi cab would be an example of that, equity and disparity work group. Ethos, for example, Ethos was an addition of 8 full day meetings. In addition to the time that takes at the meeting, there's a significant amount of work that goes into planning the meeting, identifying the speakers, preparing the materials, and reacting afterwards to what comes out of it. And that's an example of something where it wouldn't have been easy to scale up our staff quickly to support those meetings and then scale it back down. So we just have to figure out, what are we going to do not as well, or what are we going to stop doing while we're responding to these meetings? Next slide. Under innovation and change, I think I've already mentioned most of these, but a few other examples of big ideas that I think would be great for us to explore are legal link, which is something that Sarah and President Tollefson talked about. It would be it'd be a more interactive, more marketing focused legal directory, and also a way for the public to find lawyers who can help them with their issues. Also, another thing we've talked about is having a regulatory pro bono panel or an ombuds program. For many of our members, one of the primary ways that they will interact with us is through being the subject of a grievance or having an issue with their license. And oftentimes, the folks that they're dealing with are the folks who are investigating the grievance or who are prosecuting the grievance. And understandably, they want a place at the organization where they can get support, where they can get information. And that's not always going to be easily done by the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. And so we've talked about perhaps somewhere else in the organization, we could have a pro bono panel available. We could have an ombuds person who can answer questions, give them information, and just generally give them sort of a feeling of support when they're in those processes. And then, of course, the other thing that's changing is just everything about the way we do our work as we consider changes to our physical space and figuring out how we work in a remote environment. Next slide. Adding without taking away. I think I've mostly mentioned all of these things, I think. Next slide. And striving for excellence. There are so many things that we would like to be doing better. And it requires the opportunity and the space to plan, to evaluate, and to be proactive, as opposed to, I think, most of the time, a lot of us feel like, we're just reacting to what is right in front of us, what was due yesterday, what's on fire, let me deal with that right now. And there's not as much time as there should be to be a little more proactive. So some examples of things that we would like to do better: we'd like to do a comprehensive bylaw review. We'd like to improve the way that we manage and communicate about our policies. We'd like to improve travel and event planning, not only for the board meetings, but for all of the activities that we do around the state. We all know that from a presentation we had a few months ago that volunteer engagement is down, and we'd like to really invest in improving volunteer engagement and improving that volunteer experience. Improving member support, including there's a proposal that's going to be coming forth soon for a member wellness council, and we'd like to expand those member wellness services. Increasing public outreach and improving the experience of all of our volunteers, including those of you serving on the board. Next slide. Okay, this is my last slide. So, sometimes it can be difficult to quantify the work. We're not producing widgets, we're putting on events and we're tweaking policies and we do a lot of talking. But I did want to try to see if I could pull some hard data for you to look at. And I picked 2012, not for any reason other than it's basically 10 years ago, but also, as it turns out, when I picked that number, I realized that that was shortly after the referendum, which was a time of sort of reevaluating what our footprint is. So looking back at 2012, our active membership has grown by 15%, and applications for admission are up 5%. So that gives you sort of a sense of, when you think about the universe of people that we're dealing with, it has grown. One thing that I noticed in looking at some of our dashboards is that some of our one-to-one member contacts have shrunk. And I think that's probably a result of the way that we were looking at programming post-referendum. There's a lot of new programming that has been launched in the last 10 years. And I've got the list there. We've got the listening tour, the licensing payment plan, our blog, legal lunchbox, the low bono and the cannabis law section. That was when we adopted our first diversity inclusion plan, and a lot of programming grew out of that. We did a health insurance exchange. We started doing a member survey, and to be clear, some things did move, change, or get sunset. And I think so. Some examples are the Washington Leadership Institute moved to the University of Washington, although we still fund it, but we don't staff it anymore. The Home Foreclosure Project moved to Northwest Justice Project. We intentionally shrunk our CLE footprint. We had 2 diversity committees before that, which merged. There was a program called Decoding the Law, which was meant to be a public outreach program, which came and went in the last 10 years. But I think on balance, we didn't take away as much as we added. And it seems like a lot of what we did in the last 10 years was get away from the investment in the one-to-one member contact and try to focus on bigger contacts like legal lunchbox, for example. Legal lunchbox reaches thousands and thousands of members. And then since 2012, our staff capacity has shrunk by 3%, which is approximately 4 staff people. When I came into this role a couple years ago, we did eliminate 3 positions through attrition. And I do feel like it's gotten a little lean. It seems like the work has only increased. And I think that adding some additional positions would improve our ability in all these areas that I've mentioned. So the executive leadership team identified 6 areas of need in the organization, areas that we feel like there are pain points, there are bottlenecks, areas that we'd like to improve. And from that, we narrowed it down and tried to prioritize down to 4 positions that we're still evaluating. And those 4 positions, one would be a public outreach position that's really focused on improving that outreach to the public. This one would be synergistic with 2 requests that we've gotten from entities that would like additional staff support for work that they have planned for next year. So that's the Practice of Law Board and the Council on Public Defense. Another position that we're thinking about is adding a policy attorney to the Office of General Counsel. This one also would be synergistic with those 2 entity requests that I just mentioned. We're also considering an organizational project manager and also an additional auditor to allow us to improve our random audit program, which has really diminished over the years. So those are the things that we're evaluating and considering. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Tara. I am going to back up a few slides to finish the salary slide that I was on. So as Tara mentioned, we do have these, we are considering these 4 additional staff. What we've modeled for you that I'll be going over in more detail as we move through the presentation is the approximate cost for 2 additional positions. So 2 out of those 4. And the additional cost of 2 positions we're estimating would be around $218,484, which would include the salary and the benefits. And if approved, this would increase total salaries in FY23 from $12,675,409 to $12,893,893. And so I'll get into the overall impact after the pending items. So pending items are just things we're waiting on. So the budget is an iterative process, as was demonstrated when we're going through and manually reconciling, we're finding things that need to change. The other thing that creates this sort of iterative process is pending items. So insurance, we don't have final rates yet, and we anticipate getting those in end of July or early August. The Keller deduction hasn't been completely computed yet. That will be completed in August, but we put in $50,000 as a placeholder. So that could change up or down a little bit. FICA, medical, and PERS, which is sort of the retirement benefits, taxes, the medical benefits. Those actual rates haven't come in yet from the state. We anticipate getting those late July or early August. And at that time, we'll reevaluate what we put in as estimated increases to see if we need to make any adjustments up or down. And then ORCA rates, final rates for those aren't available until August. And, before the pandemic, we offered almost sort of as a benefit to employees an ORCA card to all employees. And that's gone down dramatically since the pandemic because employees have to qualify for an ORCA card now. So if they're working totally remotely, they no longer qualify for one. They have to come in at some cadence that's fairly regular to qualify for an ORCA card. And then the other thing that's pending is section. So when we're reviewing the finances today, the budget today, We're not including sections because section budgets haven't been fully input because they were just due from sections a little over a week ago. And we'll be inputting those and completing them throughout the month. And we'll bring those back with the final budget presentation in September. So the next slide is really the overview of the budget. So this is comparing the budget to, I can't get this thing to move up. Okay, this is comparing the budget to the FY22 reforecast. So we're going to start in this section, and this is the FY22 reforecast here. So what we're starting with in the beginning cycle projected fund balance, the $7,072,174, is the actual fund balance for the general fund at the beginning of FY22. The budgeted revenue in the reforecast was $21,531,920. The budgeted expenses were $21,296,766, which would have us anticipating a surplus, a budget surplus of $235,154. And that would have us with a projected fund balance at the end of this year, at the end of this fiscal year, of $7,307,328. So what we're doing is pulling the projected fund balance for FY23 up here. And we've got two scenarios here. So the first scenario in this column is the FY23 budget with a current staffing model. This scenario at the far column is the FY23 budget with additional staff. And that's with the estimate of those two additional staff that I talked about when we looked at the salary slide. So under the current staffing model, we anticipate the budgeted revenue to be $21,891,872 with a breakdown of the licensing revenue and other revenue here. And then budgeted expenses, we expect total expenses to be $21,926,883 with a breakdown of direct expenses here of $2,541,07 and indirect expenses at $19,386,776. So when you take the revenue minus the expenses, that leaves us with an operating outcome of minus $35,011. We would anticipate to offset that operating shortfall with our reserves, which would be a anticipated use of reserves of $35,011. So when you take the beginning fund balance, the anticipated beginning fund balance up here, and subtract the operating deficit of $35,011, you end up with a remaining reserve balance at the end of a projected fund balance at the end of FY23 of $7,272,317. So that would be our projected fund balance at the end of FY23 under the current staffing scenario. Under the scenario where we would add to staff, the only thing that changes is the indirect cost, which would go up to $19,605,260. And when you take the revenue minus the total cost, that would leave us with an operating shortfall of $253,495, which would then implicate the anticipated use of reserves in the amount of $253,495. And so when you take the beginning reserve balance, the projected reserve balance at the beginning of FY23, and subtract the $253,495, that would leave us with a projected fund balance under the additional staffing model of $7,053,833. And then the next slide is really looking at the projected fund balances for all funds, for the three funds. And I shouldn't say all funds because sections are excluded from this right now. We'll include sections in the next version in September. The general fund is under, and we've got two scenarios here again, current staffing, additional staffing. And so you can see it's pretty much the same as the last slide for the general fund. Under the current staffing model, we would anticipate the reserve balance at the end of the year to be $7,272,317. The CPF fund, we expect $730,000 in revenue for FY23. The budgeted expenses total are $679,378. That's direct cost of 5023, which is pretty much the anticipated gifts that would be given out, and then the indirect costs to support the fund. So the net here would be $50,622, which would be added to the beginning fund balance of $4,203,000, which would leave an projected ending fund balance for FY23 at $4.254 million. And the CLE fund, we expect revenue of $1,894,725. Expenses, direct and indirect, are broken down here for a total of $1,644,044. So when you subtract revenue from expenses, we would be expecting a surplus of $256,81, which would then be added to the projected fund balance at the beginning of the year, which would leave us an ending fund balance, a projected ending fund balance of $1,556,048. And then the only thing that changes under the additional staffing model to the right is the general fund ending fund balance, which would be projected to end FY23 at $7,053,833. The other funds remain unchanged. So that is the projected fund balances for the three funds under both of these two scenarios. And then the other information that we have for you here is a breakdown of the line items of the various expenses and revenue. So coming down here, we have the revenue broken down by line item and GL code. We have direct expenses broken down, and this is comparing FY22 line items to the projected FY23 budget. Direct expenses are broken down, and then indirect expenses are broken down and compared, and then the variances are given over here. And if the variance is in parens, that's a negative variance. If it's positive, that's a positive variance, meaning if it's an expense, the expense is lower. If it's a negative variance, it means the expense for the year is higher as compared to the FY23 budget. And then it gives you a breakdown of the funds at the end here of the line item breakdown. And so you can see under the general fund, it's breaking down the funds and giving you for FY23 what the total revenue, direct expenses, indirect expenses, total expenses, including direct and indirect for each fund, and then the outcome, the net at the end, which is what I went over in the slide before. And then after that is we've included every cost center associated with the budget. And in the cost centers, we've included a comparison to FY21 actuals, FY22 reforecast, and the FY23 budget. And so all of the cost centers are provided here for you as well. And then at the end of this, we've also included a line item comparison to the FY22 original budget to the FY23 budget. So as you know, the reforecast came after the FY22 budget, but this gives you the full comparison. And I'm sorry, I'm still scrolling down here. So here it is. So after the cost centers, we do have a comparison of the FY22 budget, the original budget, to the FY23 budget. And so that is the conclusion of the budget presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for Advancement Director Plachy? Okay, Governor-elect Clark, followed by Brent Williams-Ruth, followed by Carla Higginson.
Sure, Brent, thank you. I did have two of them. First of all, with the record inflation we're seeing right now, what inflationary amount do what okay, was this built for okay okay with that in mind.
Yes. So when we were making the budget, when we were formulating the budget cost for FY23, the cost of the actual cost of things was taken into consideration. So, for instance, a good example is cost to have these meetings and cost to attend conferences and that kind of thing. So those were put up with the understanding that inflation is happening. And so, yes, the short answer is for direct costs, we certainly considered that and did raise where appropriate. For the indirect cost, we are pending some items. So for instance, for benefits, we built in a cost increase. And I think the cost increase we built in was around 3%. We don't expect that to come in a whole lot higher, but we did build in some things, but those are still pending. We're still waiting for the actual, but yes, we did anticipate cost increases with most of the items. The salaries, that the salary increases are based on the grid that the board that we adopted in the reforecast. So and that was based off of a compensation study that was just done very recently. So that's based on fairly accurate market data as of the time of that study. We do anticipate reevaluating the compensation for employees on some regular cadence, which will probably be likely every other year. And HR would do that. It wouldn't be an intensive compensation study like was done this time. It would be a market survey that would be done by our HR department. And that would be anticipated to be done in FY24, I think is probably what we'd be anticipating.
I'm sure, Kevin. Thank you for that. And then my second one that I wanted to ask was, where are we at with trying to sublease space there? I know we had been advertising it for 32 a square, and I know Tara had said they were for lower. I don't believe we've had hits at all. So, yeah, with that.
I can jump in, and
Sure.
I don't know if Glennis has any more information. I don't have any updates since the one I sent out via email. We're actively working with our brokers. I think it's a bit of a tough market. There's a lot of folks trying to sublet. We do hear that there are more and more folks looking for space. Our space has some limitations in terms of what might be attractive to a subletter. The biggest one being that we're not set up for reception. So we have had some architectural plans drawn up so that we can show people what it might look like, but we haven't taken the step of actually reconfiguring the space. So unfortunately, I don't have any more updates other than to say we are really trying to work closely with the brokers, following their advice in terms of where to set our pricing. And I don't know, Glennis, I see you nodding. Anything to add? Has anything changed since my last update?
No, right now we are working very closely with the broker. We've had tours scheduled, just no bites, unfortunately. And so the broker is recommending that we lower our price point. And now that Tiffany's on board, we're going to do a financial analysis to see if that's even feasible. So that's sort of where we're at right now.
So why would we need to do a financial analysis if we're paying for rent for a space that's empty. I mean, it would seem like even renting it for half of what we are now, okay, we're still making money then, right?
And I think,
yeah.
go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I can answer some of that. I think part of the fiscal analysis would be what is because part of the negotiation of the space will likely be tenant improvements, that kind of thing. So figuring out how much could we negotiate for tenant improvements and where's our threshold point for that? So I think there's things that if they're looking at lowering the rate, we want to know what our threshold would be for those kind of things, because they're going to have to be done. The space as it is not probably going to work for a tenant.
Thank you.
Governor, President-elect Clark, do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you. Governor Williams-Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will say that as a whole, I'm pretty disappointed in this budget presentation. First, I want to say I just had to redo my company's benefits, and because of inflation, it was a 10.1% increase for health insurance. So I think we should be prepared, unless we plan on altering the program that's offered to our staff, that 3% is not going to be anywhere near what the market's going to be coming out at. First, I want to go back to last year and the budget amount that we gave for staff as a 3% increase, which was to remind people that this was not everybody got 3%. This was the money that was given to the executive director to try and rectify years of, I don't know the appropriate word, but not correct salary staffing levels. And so some people saw a bump because that's what they were entitled to and rightly should be earning, as where others saw a very small, less than 1% increase. And now we're seeing a 2.3% increase when this country has undergone 10% inflation since January. And with all due respect to the amazing, great work that we did to get people to here, the survey, in my opinion, as a fiduciary, is completely inadequate. And to ask staff to be waiting for 2 more years while gas is at $6 a gallon, while we're watching 80% increase in the cost of poultry. I mean, anyone who watches Good Morning America, the Today Show, knows that in the first hour from 7 to 8 every morning, they are talking about the economy every single day. And to have a 2.3% across the board to then be given to the executive director to then allocate, I feel is wholly deficient. Number 3, the anticipated staff. I'm again disheartened at the number of staff that are being added, specifically to the team for under Chief Singleton. There's not one person that's being targeted for being onboarded that's going towards the diversity, equity, and inclusion measures of the bar. But yet we talk about it at every single meeting. We hear about it from the court. There's going to be a proposal to actually add work to her team later today, courtesy of the Diversity Ad Hoc Task Force that I was chair of. And they're already at capacity. Mm-hmm. They're there. The team is not sitting around playing Wordle. So again, I appreciate, and again, I'm not saying we don't hire the people for IT. I'm fine with those 4. I want 4 more. And then I went through, and there are specific budget items. The Washington Leadership Institute's a great program. We just heard from Treasurer-elect Adewale as being a part of that program, but yet it's not part of us. We heard from Director Nevitt that it's not part of us. But why are we going from 44,000 to 80,000 in funding for them? What is that? We're dropping surveys from 50,000 to 17,000. Consulting was dropped by 75,000. There's a 10% increase in the phones. What, again, the diversity committee dropped from 6,000 to 3,800, but then the line item next out for events and programs related to diversity was up. Our BOG meetings are up 58,000 for next year. Really? Really? I'm sorry. I mean, with no disrespect to Nancy Hawkins, and I think we should just start funding her to be here. We don't get the public at these meetings. We have an amazing conference center with people that know how to use the facilities in there. I am the first champion for ambassador. I believe our BOG meeting should be in Seattle. And then the next week, the officers and the governors of every district or a target district should go and have an ambassadorial meeting to have the luncheons where we go and have like what we had yesterday. We don't need to take the entire circus on the road to have a 1-hour luncheon. And coming from years of fiscal conservatism, I am disgusted that we're going to add $60,000 to the BOG budget. But yet, BOG travel and outreach is dropped from 30,000 to 10,000. So we'll have the BOG meetings, but actually asking individual governors to go out and meet, especially people who have bigger districts, District 2, District 5, District 8, the new governor from District 8. I personally have been from Ording to Lake Chelan. The new governor that's going to be taking over President-elect Clark's district. Those are districts that need the money to be able to get to their people. Governor Boyd's district is another one that spans many, many miles, and it's not just a quick up and down an I-5. But yet we're dropping the actual outreach to our members. But yet we talk about how important the Membership Service Engagement Council is. But yet we're cutting the actual budget to fund the outreach for the governors. In the last 3 months, the pleasure of serving as a governor has cost me $4,700. Hold on, I got the number right here. $4,797.08. I am extremely privileged to have an amazing credit score and access to credit because everything went onto my credit card and then would get reimbursed. Every single one of those was for an authorized, legitimate gubernatorial service expense. I really just don't know what we're doing when we are looking at inflation, but yet the overall budget, if you just scroll down to the bottom line, is actually less money than last year. What are we doing? Where are our real benefits? And what are we caring about? Is it for us to be able to stay at a Marriott for 4 days? Or is it about the service? Is it about living the mission we say we have? So I really hope that Budget and Audit goes back and takes a look at this, and especially, leave everything else. I don't care. But really, I will be voting no on any budget that has a 2.3% increase for our staff. I'm saying it right now. That is
Crystal calling from Medicare Rewards.
Medicare.
Yeah, Medicare. That's our staff's going to need to be on Medicare if we're doing 2.3%. I really don't know what we're doing where we're ignoring. And by the way, as I almost forgot, our diversity survey is reached its end of its useful life. Where's the line item in this budget? And because it's going to be a big expense. I can't remember. Somebody please step up to tell me what it was about 10 years ago when we did it, but it was a big number. And we need to do it again. The issue hasn't gone away, despite the Supreme Court saying we don't need to have voter rights or whatever. the issues of those things need to be brought forward. There needs to be an expense paid to stand behind our values. And maybe I'm missing it. There's so many line items, and I confess I do not attend the budget and audit meetings. I've got my other meetings. I'm not on that committee, but I'm not seeing the commitment for one of the most fundamental issues that is in our mission statement that we hear from the court, that we talk about. I mean, Governor Adewale helped us bring an amazing group of speakers to our meeting in Spokane in May that are all part of the DEI efforts that are changing the face of the legal profession in our communities. But yet our budget's not reflecting it. So I very much hope that by the time we come back in September, there will be some significant changes. And we can't raise dues, that's already set. But please know that I will be advocating for a dues increase to send to the Supreme Court for the 2024 year, because I believe it's wholly inappropriate that this organization have not increased its dues in 5 years, especially given the inflationary numbers. And by the way, inflation isn't new, it's just astronomical. There has been inflation in 2021 and 2020 and 2019, and we've just been absorbing it. I don't know what we're doing here. This budget makes me shake my head, and I really hope there'll be something different come September, because I'd really like to be able to stand behind it and support it. Thank you.
Next, we have Governor Higginson, followed by Practice of Law Board Chair Michael Cherry, followed by Diana Singleton.
Thank you. I have a different focus than my colleague, but I do want to say that I don't think we should be increasing attorney dues just as inflation is hitting everyone else. It's hitting attorneys as well. And by the fact that we're keeping the dues static, over the next year, we're actually increasing the dues by 10% because of inflation. So I hope we won't forget that we live on the backs of our members. And when we all cycle off the board, as I will be doing at the end of September, I'm just a dues paying member at that point too. And I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we really are fiduciaries and need to live within our means, just as we do, I'm sure, as individuals in our own households. We don't dip into savings for unnecessary things. You set money aside. We call it reserves. Other people call it savings accounts. You save it for important expenditures, big things, buying a house, buying a car, emergency medical, what have you. We have a budget presented to us that is a deficit budget, and I know that several other people don't agree that it's a deficit if we have savings we can use to throw at it to balance it. But in fact, it's deficit spending. We're taking money, we're bringing in a certain amount of money, we're proposing to spend more than we're taking in. That isn't prudent fiscally. You do that for long enough, and pretty soon you have no savings, and then you have no ability to fund things that you don't expect to have happen. So, for example, planning for inflation. So I'm not in favor of this budget as it's currently configured, because it's not balanced. I also recall a year or two ago that we had, I believe the board had set, well, longer ago than that, a $1.5 million reserve that we would always keep available for unanticipated costs, but I don't see that called out in the budget. And I apologize, Kevin, I didn't think to ask this when we were at the budget and audit committee meeting, or I would have, but I'm just wondering what happened to that, if anyone knows, and query whether we shouldn't be including that money, or whether we should be including that money in our reserves when we have specifically, I believe, as a board, set aside of $1.5 million that we always want to keep on hand for unanticipated costs. The other thing is that we've talked at various times about a building reserve, so that when our lease is up and we can hopefully move to less expensive and more attractive space in a location that isn't as unattractive as the current location has turned out to be. We've talked about having money set aside so that we could buy a building or buy space somewhere, maybe not a whole building, but buy some space rather than leasing. But I don't see that recognized in this budget. Again, I apologize, I didn't think about this last week when we were at budget and audit, but I do think it's something we need to be mindful of and consider whether we really want to do. I know there was discussion about creating a building reserve. What I don't recall is exactly whether we passed some kind of a policy on that, or we just had discussion and that's all that happened. But I do think it's time for that discussion, since in a few years, a couple or so, I believe, we need to start looking for office space elsewhere. So I just want to say that I'm not in support of this budget as it's currently configured for the reasons that have been indicated. I do share some of my colleagues' concerns. Some of them I think are well founded. I think the numbers just don't feel as fiscally responsible as they should be, so that we can make sure that we can keep on doing the work that we need to do for the members and currently serving the public as well. And that is not to say that I don't really appreciate the work that Kevin has done. He's done such a remarkable job. I can hardly say thank you enough for the work that you've put in. And I also don't want to suggest that Maggie's work and anyone else's work on this has been anything other than stellar. You've done an excellent job of putting the numbers together for us. This is more of a policy level discussion that I'm throwing out here. So I want it to be clear that I very much appreciate the work the staff's done, and certainly Tiffany, I look forward to working with you on that as well. So that's what I have to say, and thank you.
Could I provide some information to respond to some of Governor Higginson's questions?
I think it would be appropriate if you answered your questions, please.
Thank you. So Governor Higginson, to your questions about the reserve funds, they're not actually calculated. They're not separated out in the budget, but the projected fund balance of 7.272317 under the current staffing model would take into account the fact that under the current fiscal policy, we do have to keep 2,550,000 in restricted funds. So that's an operating reserve and the facilities reserve. That's what that constitutes. So there is about 2.5 million that are restricted. The others are unrestricted.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That's helpful.
Governor Higginson, any other questions or comments?
No, thank you, Mr. President.
Next up, I believe, is Practice of Law Board Chair Michael Cherry.
Thank you, President Tollefson. And let me begin by apologizing to Governor Williams-Ruth that my daily spam Medicare Advantage call came through the system. I have attempted to block it, but it keeps coming in from a different number every day, and it's a number very close to one of my key clients. So I tend to jump to answer it, and I apologize for the interruption. I think that Governor Williams-Ruth handled it brilliantly, and I hope I didn't put him off of his thoughts. Secondly, I would like to state and begin by saying that I, as the chair of the Practice of Law Board, on behalf of the Practice of Law Board, I am so appreciative of the support that we get from all of the staff of the Washington State Bar Association. And you know there's a but coming, and this is it. We are overworking the staff right now. The work that the Practice of Law Board is doing, and perhaps we have become a more active Practice of Law Board than it was in the past, is overwhelming the capacity of the current staff. And this shows how thinly stretched the staff is right now. And my fear is that they're not, in fact, asking for enough staff additions. Executive Director Nevitt mentioned that, we're looking at this lab, and even if the lab is rejected, that's not going to slow down the work that we are generating. We are asking questions about the unlawful practice of law, about innovation, and about how to educate the public under our role as a board that is requiring them to do extensive legal research into questions that have never been asked before. Whether or not the laboratory passes, the Supreme Court decides it is a good idea, we have held for longer than the 90 days notice before going to the court, because we want answers to the questions in order to give the court the best information we can for them to make a well-informed decision. We're asking very difficult questions that require amazing amounts of legal research, such as a question that the Chief Justice asked us to answer as to whether the court has the authority to even create a lab without legislative backing, and what it means to license an entity. Whether or not the lab goes forward, the answer to these questions are extremely useful to the Washington State Bar Association and its members. So I just wanted to add this, this comment in support of the staffing of the Washington State Bar Association. They are extremely busy, and we are asking them tough questions. We are asking them tough questions in the taxi cab area as to what does it mean to administer a Washington Supreme Court board. We're asking them tough questions with regards to ethos, which require research, thought, and the generation of memos and documentation to support that. So again, my thanks to the staff. They have stepped in to do work when there has been nobody else there. Kevin Plachi, Hanada Garcia have worked hard on looking at costs of a laboratory, work that is not in their normal area of work. They have just taken it on and done just tremendous work and provided tremendous efforts in support. So I implore you to please consider whether or not the staffing is adequate and whether we are budgeting the staffing correctly in the correct increments to support the boards and the other activities of the bar. Thank you for your consideration.
Diana Singleton is next, followed by, I believe, Governor Clark again.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to provide a little bit of information to Governor Williams-Ruth, which I really appreciate your comments, but on the demographic membership study, that's actually in this year's budget for $50,000. So that's underway. We have our consultant who's getting things going. And so there's a little bit of budget for FY23 in terms of the implementation. What do we do with once the study's going to be done, which we anticipate will be sometime this fall. And then just on the note of the decrease for the diversity committee and the increase for the programs in the diversity committee are sort of one and the same. The decrease is just really for the meeting support. And so we're anticipating, because we're still in a pandemic, we're trying to be more fiscally cognizant that we may not be meeting as much in person as we anticipated. And then the increase is for the work that diversity committee is going to be doing on planning for a new diversity and inclusion plan, since that's also outdated since 2013. So just to give you a little bit of information, but I really appreciate your comments.
Did you want to say anything about your staffing levels? No.
Well, I could confirm that we are stretched and everybody's working really hard.
Thank you, Governor Williams-Ruth.
Her wordle's not up to
Oh, I'm sorry, Diana Singleton, are you done? I got interrupted.
Yes.
Okay. We need to pause the budget discussion because we have a guest presenter for our next agenda item. So my plan is, unless somebody vehemently objects, is to put the budget discussion on pause, come back after lunch and take it back up.